Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into something absolutely fascinating. We're impartially unpacking one of the most abstract frameworks out there, Chris Langan's Cognitive-Theoretic model of the universe, or the CTMU for short. This is a massive, bold attempt to literally stitch together mathematics, quantum physics, and theology into one unified system. It's dense, for sure, but we're going to break the whole shebang down together.
So here is the huge question we're tackling today. Can a mathematical model actually prove the existence of God and the afterlife? By acting as a literal mathematical theory of everything, we're going to explore how the CTMU approaches humanity's oldest philosophical questions. And it does this not through pure faith, but by trying to map out the fundamental logical architecture of reality itself. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the ultimate identity. Second, reality as a self-simulation. Third, quantum consciousness. Fourth, co-creating the universe. And finally, the afterlife and antithesis.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the ultimate identity, defining reality's core.
Before we even touch the physics, Langan starts with a core premise. Reality fundamentally possesses an identity. Just by using the word reality, you're identifying a unified something. To ground this mathematically, the model leans on a concept called panentheism. Think of it like an author in a book. The story exists entirely inside the author's mind, right? But the author is obviously so much more than just that story. In this model, the physical universe is entirely part of God, but God is absolutely not confined to it. That overarching total identity is exactly what Langan defines as God.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because it brilliantly illustrates how the CTMU mathematically connects diverse global theologies. Over in Taoism, you have the way reality works. In Buddhism, there's sunyata, or emptiness, which Langan actually maps to pure syntax, basically pure cognition without specific content. Then, on the flip side, you have the Abrahamic God, famously telling Moses at the burning bush, "I am that I am," literally identifying as existence or identity itself. The model argues these traditions are actually all recognizing the exact same central substance of reality, an ultimate identity that inherently possesses sentience and consciousness.
Moving on to Section 2, reality as a self-simulation, looking at the display and the processor.
So, how does this ultimate identity actually operate within our physical day-to-day world? Well, Langan uses a pretty wild computer analogy. The physical universe, the space and time you and I are interacting with right now, is just this static display. It's a terminal domain full of static states. But here's the catch. Static states need processing to actually change and move. In this framework, God acts as the processor. Existing completely outside our immediate space and time, this processor provides the actual juice, the computing power that allows physical reality to move forward and stay coherent.
That brings us to Section 3, quantum consciousness and the identity operator.
If reality is essentially a processed simulation, we really need to zoom in. How does this processing happen at the microscopic level? Which leads us to a highly counterintuitive, honestly surprising question. In this model, is a completely inanimate object, say a wooden table, actually conscious?
To answer that, we have to look at the absolute tiniest building blocks of the universe. In the CTMU, these microscopic fragments are called identity operators. Because God is the ultimate overarching identity, these tiny quanta are basically micropieces of that massive mind. What this implies is pretty staggering. It means physical matter itself is built entirely out of these operators. So yeah, a very generic basic baseline of consciousness literally exists in absolutely everything.
Let's break down how that works. Every single identity operator is running a continuous, non-stop feedback loop. First, it takes data from the outside world as input. Next, it processes that data internally, using pure syntax. Finally, it spits it back out into reality as a brand new external state. Every single particle in the universe is constantly running this blinking, rapid-fire processing loop.
All right, Section 4, co-creating the universe and generating reality. Because the physical world is constructed from these conscious quantum loops, reality isn't just some fixed, static stage that we're walking around on. Physical rules, like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, are entirely probabilistic. They don't lock in exact predetermined outcomes. So what actually determines what happens? According to this model, it's us. It's our collective human will that collapses those probabilities. We are quite literally generating the reality we experience every single day.
Let's look at exactly how we pull this off.
Every single time you look around, recognize a friend, or just observe the room you're in, you aren't just passively watching a movie. You're actively recreating your own internal state, while simultaneously regenerating the external medium and the specific boundaries of the objects around you, so you can tell them apart. You're actively co-creating the universe. And the central overarching processor, God, is what harmonizes all of our billions of intersecting individual perspectives so that we all seamlessly share one reality at the same time.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, the afterlife and antithesis, heaven, hell, and coherence.
Now, this immense responsibility of mental co-creation naturally transitions us to what happens after physical death. According to the CTMU, your consciousness absolutely persists. If you're aligned with the universe, salvation simply means the overarching processor pulls you back into the central non-terminal domain. But if you deeply hate or deny that central identity, God, who by definition is perfect, just cuts you off. And because your consciousness still desperately wants to exist, you're forced to try and generate your own isolated world, entirely on your own.
Because reality fundamentally has a mental aspect to it. A toxic consciousness that is suddenly forced to generate its own reality will inevitably generate an evil world for itself. It perfectly echoes what John Milton famously wrote, "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell a hell of heaven." Within this framework, this mathematical isolation maps precisely to the theological concept of hell.
Now, zooming out to a systemic scale, to maintain a perfect boundary, God absolutely cannot absorb contradiction. Structurally, this requires a defined antithesis, what theology would call Satan, or an anti-God. While this antithesis doesn't have its own natural power, the model claims it gains physical coherence by exploiting what it calls secondary tealers. These are rigid human power structures like massive corporations or sprawling governments. By hijacking these vast networks, the antithesis essentially aggregates power and manages to manifest right here in the physical world.
So we've journeyed from the absolute overarching processor of the universe, all the way down to the tiny identity operators blinking inside the atoms of your own body. If our minds, our subjective choices, and our collective will are fundamentally entangled with the active, ongoing processing of the universe itself, the most critical takeaway from this explainer is to really look inward. Ask yourself, as a conscious processor embedded in this vast system, what kind of reality are you actively generating today?